Welcome guys to another episode of Home Ed Me podcast. So we are on session number 8. So every week on Thursday at 3:30, I think last week we were slightly late, but every week on Thursday at 3:30, I aim for 3:30, we have a new session with, a new episode with someone new that is within the education sphere. So this podcast is for educators, for teachers, for anyone that works with kids. So if you're a homeschooler, if you're a parent, or even if you're just a teacher, then this is a podcast for you. So we explore different topics each week. This week we're looking at humanities. So we're on session number 8 with Claire today.
Hello.
Welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So you wanted to join in to discuss humanities. It's such a big, broad area, and you wear lots of different hats and do lots of different things. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you today about what you do and how you've got to where you are. So shall we go back to when you were younger and you talk us through your journey?
Sure, no problem. Well, the reason that I chose humanities rather than a specific subject like geography or history or business studies is that, first of all, I've taught lots of different humanities subjects. And secondly, that I'm a really big fan of making connections between subjects. So I feel quite restricted if I just have to teach one particular subject. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities in education to make those connections. So I'm a big fan and a big... what's the word? Advocate. There we go.
Yeah.
Interdisciplinary learning. I don't think that learning should be in a box and you should learn maths now and then you should learn art now. I think that there's a huge opportunity to combine everything all together.
And I think if you look back in history and you look at the great scientists, and we were briefly talking about this before we went live, that before, when you look at the great scientists, you look at the great inventors, they were all multidisciplinary. They had the arts, they had the humanities, they had the sciencey side to them, and the mathematical side. There, I got it. And they were really good at everything that they did. And when they combined that, they were able to work on new discoveries, new inventions. And I think we've lost aspects of that today. Like, people are so focused on becoming a specialist in a very narrow field, which is fine, but then you lose out on how it works together on a whole holistic approach.
Yeah, I think that students in this country, in the British curriculum particularly, narrow in very early on a limited number of subjects. So it's very content heavy in those particular subjects, but there isn't as much opportunity to make the connection between them as there is in other countries around the world.
And I'm going to be really excited to explore some of that, because I don't know very much about the other countries and how they kind of work. So it'll be nice to kind of get an insight into that a bit later. So first of all, tell us about your journey into what you're doing right now.
Well, my educational journey hasn't really been a straightforward one. I did attend a mainstream state school. I went to universities, did my A-levels, so quite a traditional pathway. But there was lots of bumps and detours along the way as well. So when I was born deaf, 95% deaf. And my mum really had to fight to get me into mainstream education in the first place. Because the doctors and the teachers wanted to send me to a school for the deaf or a school for the disabled, somebody that could meet my needs. So there was definitely a push against me attending mainstreaming education. And so when I went for, the little chat that you have with the headmaster, and they said, well, she can't really come to school unless she knows her ABCs. And my mum, she never had any education beyond kind of the age of 15, really. She was quite shocked. She said, but what do you mean she needs her ABC? She can read. Like, it just didn't occur to her that this was an unusual situation, that I could read so early on. But I always had, she used to call me a sponge for learning. So I used to love learning. And as long as I could see people's mouth moving, then I could listen and I could learn. So often I was in my own little bubble. And I think that one of the challenges of being an adult, now that I've got my hearing back, is actually blocking out the outside noise, because for a very long time I was in my own learning bubble. I loved reading because books were a place where I could hear sounds for real and I could kind of experience what other people had experienced, but without it being in real. It's very difficult to explain, really. But
were you still able to hear? So you say you were 95% deaf. Were you still able to pick up sound though?
I could pick up some sounds, and in particular, I can pick up vibrations. So still can today. You know, when you stood next to a speaker at a concert, it was like that. So I could tell what people were talking about. I could tell if they were angry or sad or happy from being in the same room. I could feel those vibrations, I guess. And I took up dancing very early on as well, because I didn't need to hear the music in order to get the rhythm. At least that was my reasoning.
So in terms of you saying you were able to read, were you just able to decipher the words and to have an idea of what they meant, or were you able to actually read out loud?
I could read out loud to my
okay.
mum by the time I started school. So I understand that's completely crazy, and I have no idea. And she doesn't know either. My brother didn't read until he was about 10 years old. He was a bit behind me.
You know, there are a lot of kids that are really high functioning at a young age. And I've met a few with the workshops that I've done, and they reach the age of 3 or 4, and they're just sponges, and they just take it in, and they just need that content to be thrown at them so they can just absorb it. So maybe you were just really high functioning as a child.
Maybe I'm quite interested as well in you know, phonics for learning and the sounds, because I often have a read every now and then, not expert, but I have a read of the research around phonics, and I wonder how that works for deaf children and how they learn to read when they can't hear the shape of the sound and things like that. But that's just a curiosity. And then so what happened was I went to mainstream education, everything was fine, went through as normal. And then when I was 10 years old, I had an operation, and I had surgery to basically give me artificial eardrums and fix them. So I was off school. I was out of school for about 6 months to a year, something like that. And again, so this is why I'm quite an advocate these days for homeschooling, other learning. I've had a lot of people calling me up at the moment about, through the COVID-19, of course, saying, well, what did you do in this time? And I was very lucky because my school were incredibly supportive. They sent work home on a regular basis. Of course, this is, I'm not going to say my age, but quite a long time before we had computers or the internet. So it was very textbook based and very independent learning based. So I think I got that quite early on. And I always wanted to go to a state school or a private school, but my mum could never afford something like that. So I just went back to normal school, sat my GCSEs, and then went on to do A-levels. But I always had this desire to do something extra. Like I never felt like I fit in mainstream education. So at my school, I wanted to do history. I couldn't do history. So I was like, oh, I'll study it in my lunchtime then. And that's what I did. And I went in and sat the exam, and I sat it a year early with an as a private candidate, but within my own school. And I sat history a year early. And then I went to do my A-levels. And I just followed all of my friends and all of my peers. We went from the feeder school to the college that was attached to the school. And once I got there, I started looking around and thinking, actually, this isn't what I want to do. I don't think I want to be in the, we had no advice on subjects or anything like that, of course, and subject options. But I thought, this isn't what I want to do. And I found a school somewhere elsewhere that did performing arts. And I'd gone to a stage school 3 evenings a week, as you do, and I thought, I might pursue that. So what I did was that I then got on a bus one day and travelled. I'm afraid I truanted, sorry. I truanted off my existing college, and I went and visited that one, and I said, I want to come here, I want to do performing arts. So I did performing arts A-level, but I also did the academic stuff as well. So I did geography and English literature as my other A-levels. And again, I really pursued what I was interested in, and I was interested in everything. I was interested in English literature, I was interested in science, I was interested in the world around me and trying to understand it. And I was always making those connections even then between kind of the history and the geography and everything else. So everything kind of came together, and it makes more sense for me as a learner when I make those connections between subjects. So that's something that I still continue to do now.
So when you had the operation at age 10, just going back slightly,
no problem.
How did it change your world? Like suddenly you could hear, and I'm assuming it was a lot better than what you were hearing before. So I'm assuming it's a bit like when you are completely unaware that your eyesight is really bad, and you put on glasses for the first time and you can see, and that excitement. So how did that have an impact on your learning and your education system?
I think I became quite overwhelmed actually with noise and distractions, and I have attention deficit disorder now, which you can probably tell because my stories do this kind of thing as I'm telling them. But I now see that as my superpower, kind of, that I learned to drown that out. And if I'm focused and if I'm in my own little bubble, then I can get lost in learning sometimes. And I think there's a real joy in learning that has perhaps been lost as well. And I'd like to keep hold of that for as long as possible.
I think you feel about humanities the way that I feel about science and maths and art, because it's just such a vast area. Just science on its own is so vast that in the 10 years that I've been delivering workshops, I've hardly ever repeated anything because there's so much more to learn. They're like, oh, let's move on to the next topic, let's move on. And then making those connections, and those kids that stay with us for a long time, we can then go, oh, remember we did that, it links with this, and remember we did that, it links with this. And just being able to do that is amazing. And seeing those little sparks being kind of connected in their brains, you can see the connection that they're making. And I've got this one girl that's been with us since she was 3. So she was a high functioning student, and she started really young, and her mum convinced me that she was 5 at the time, and I fell for it.
Sounds like my mum.
Yeah, because our limit was maybe it was 4 at the time. I think it was 4 or 5 at the time, and she convinced me that her kid was the age that was our lower limit. And I think she just turned 3 at the time, and our limit was 4. So she signed her up, and it wasn't until like 6 months later we actually realized what her real age was. But she really had the ability to be able to stay with the pace of the class. But she comes up with such amazing connections. Like, she'll come up to one lesson and she'll be like, oh, so this is this. And I'm like, where did you get that from? And then I kind of think about what else she's attended, and then she's making connections because she started off very young, and we started off making those connections very young, that now her brain is able to kind of pick those pieces and connect them all in a way that I can't even connect yet. And she was talking about electrons, and she's like, electrons like this because they're like, and I was like, where have you got that from? And then I remembered she did an electrostatics workshop with us, and she's picking stuff from there and connecting it. And it's amazing how kids can easily pick up those connections. But because by the time we reach adulthood, we're not used to doing it anymore, we find it so much harder.
Yeah, there's a very narrow way of boxing things. I know that the human brain likes to box things off anyway, but we tend to do that in education from quite an early age. Even things like literacy is quite a distinct focus in the curriculum, or maths is a distinct focus, and actually that exists in all aspects of life and all subjects. And
they coexist, don't they? And I think, is that boxing a thing that we've created, or do you think that's inbuilt? Because sometimes I think maybe we've just created a label and we've boxed it. Because if you talk about, I talk about how we're using science and maths in everyday life. Like when you go to the shops and you're assessing whether something's worth it, you're looking at value in terms of monetary value. And so you're looking at maths there. You're looking at the feel of the fabric. You're looking at the science behind it. Is it going to last? If you're boiling an egg, you're dealing with time. You're dealing with science. You're actually changing. It's a chemical reaction. So you're using it anyway. It's just that we haven't applied the definition of it in that context. So
one of the things that I do when I'm running a workshop on essay writing, for instance, is I say, there's a method, there's a scientific method. There's 2 different types of essays, either an exploratory essay where you're not quite sure what the answer is, so you explore it and then you analyze it, and then you kind of, that could be a theme, or that could be a theme, and you start to structure and make sense of it. And then the other way that we write essays, and indeed that we conduct science experiments, is that we have an idea of what is going to happen. And we use the scientific method for shopping. I think this dress will suit me. Why do I think this dress will suit me? Oh, because I've got something similar and that looks nice. So even having a hypothesis, testing it out, coming to a conclusion, oh no, it's too expensive, is something that we do every single day. But that wouldn't.
Exactly. And you're right. And it's like you're assessing the evidence. So you'll try it on, you'll look at yourself, and you'll assess whether it's right. So you're actually doing a mini experiment there in trialing it out and seeing how it looks like. So and I've never really thought of dress buying like that before. So that's really interesting.
Sorry.
So I think, yeah, it's so do you think it's a learnt thing then, the idea of boxing? Is it something that we've picked up from the education system when we're really young and then it stays with us? Or do you think it's also within us, we naturally box things?
I think humans have a natural need to categorize things. It comes from the biological need: safe, unsafe, risky, not risky, my tribe, not my tribe. The same kind of all human instinct. But I think magical things can happen when you look outside of your comfort zone.
That's really interesting. So from there, you talked about going to the college and you went to a performing arts college.
Well, no, I went to a college which offered performing arts.
Okay.
And then in the evenings, I went to a stage school in the evenings as well. But I decided, obviously, by the time I got to 18, maybe I don't want to be a dancer full time. I think I'll use my brain. But I didn't know anything about university. Nobody in my family had been to university. I came from, I don't know if you've seen the programme on TV called the Mighty Red Car in the Northeast. It's a real industrial area.
I don't have TV, so I don't. I haven't seen it.
It's really well worth watching, actually. It's a very well produced documentary series.
What is it about?
Just kind of growing up in that area and the challenges that you face in terms of aspirations, and struggling against that. So my family, for instance, my parents were very much like, well, why do you want to go to university? Like, no, you leave school and you get a job. That's what you do. And so I wasn't really expected to go to university, but my mum said, do what. My mum's very open-minded to everything. She thinks, do what makes you happy. So she never made me study. She never pushed me to revise. She wasn't a helicopter mum or a tiger mum or anything. That she was very much oh yeah, she likes reading. And that was her attitude to everything. Claire likes reading. And then when I was about 18, I thought, oh my goodness, what do I want to do? And I had no idea whatsoever. So I thought, oh, well, I'll do geography, because in my mind, that was studying the entire world and everything in it and the people in it. And there were so many different directions that I could take it. But I also, like I said, had a passion for reading as well and literature. So I went to the careers university advisor at school, and they said, okay, well, which university do you want to go to? And I said, Cambridge. I didn't know of any other university. I hadn't heard of other. So I got an interview at Cambridge, and when I turned up, I was so overwhelmed and out of place. I was severely, square peg in a round hole. We couldn't afford the train fare to get down there even for the interview, so we had to apply to this charity to get there. And then when we turned up, I wasn't prepared at all, because I guess my school had sent maybe 1 or 2 people to Cambridge in the past, or to an Oxford university, but didn't have a clue really about how interviews would work. And I turned up and I applied to do English literature. I like reading, I like literature. And I wrote on my application something about A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the interviewer, the professor, the lecturer guy, started off by quoting in Latin, like, well, ipso facto, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I was so intimidated, very much, no, I don't fit here, imposter syndrome, like I don't fit here at all. And I kind of babbled my way through the interview. And I got back home to my mum. I said, I don't think I want to go to university. These days, of course, you have all that preparation, particularly if you attend an independent school, or where your university applications, your statements of applications, they are often scrutinized, and it's still yours, it's still your voice, but they're prepped and prepared, and that just didn't happen when I was there. So, and she said, well, what do you want to do? So I said, I think I'm going to travel. So I ran away to India, is always the way that I describe it. And I worked as a teacher, and that's when I first kind of started thinking, oh, actually, this is not just a profession that I want to go into, but this is my calling. I want to teach. I want to make others understand, or help others to understand, the opportunities that are out there. And I got my first email address when I was 18, and I travelled to India, and I taught English for about 6 months. And when I came back, I said, right, I'm going to do geography because I want to learn about the whole world. And while I was in India, you know, with the I was looking at the world around me, and everything was coming back to me from GCSE kind of geography, and about rivers and the mountains, and then also the economics and the demographics and why people lived here and why they didn't live there, and the idea of equality and inequality and all of these themes that you get in geography. So I came back to the UK and I said, I think I'm going to study geography. Now I didn't know about being away from home, so I called up Leeds University, which is the closest university to me, and said, will you accept me this year? And they said, well, what were your grades? And I told them, and they said, oh yeah, we would accept you for geography, but we're full for this year, so you'll have to come next year. And now I'm very impatient. Like I said, you know, I've got attention deficit disorder anyway, so I was like, no, if I'm doing it, I'm doing it this year. So in the worst, now can I just give a little forewarning? These days, part of my job is to give university and careers advice, and I would not in any way give this advice. I turned the page from Leeds and Leicester was next. That's how I ended up at Leicester to study geography. Isn't that absolute? That's really terrible. But I ended up there and that's what I did. But even whilst I was there, you know, so I did, in the first year I did the geography course, and what's special, quite coincidentally and quite luckily, about Leicester University is you can either do a BSc or you can do a BA in geography. And I said, I'd like to do a BSc. I like the sciencey stuff. I like, you know, the geology and the soils and the rivers. And they said, oh no, if you didn't do any science A-levels, I'm afraid you can't study a BSc.
What's the difference? What does the BSE stand for?
So the BSc,
BSc.
Bachelor of Science,
yeah,
is all like, you know, the geology, the chemical, the physical geography stuff that you would learn. And the Bachelor of Arts, the BA, is kind of the human geography side, population, development, all those kind of topics.
How much of a crossover is there between the two?
Well, that's just my argument. There's a huge crossover. So in the first year, you both do, both, whether you're taking the Bachelor of Arts or whether you're taking the science route, you both do exactly the same core units. So what they said was, oh, well, in your second year, you can switch to a BSc. I was like, yeah.
I was going to say, you could probably do a switch later.
So that was it. That's how I ended up doing a science degree, even though I have no science A-levels whatsoever. So I'm quite lucky. And at the same time as
for those people that are listening in the first year, they tend to cover most of the stuff that you need that is A-level equivalent in that first year. Because when I was at school, and my teachers found out that I was interested in physics and maths, they scared me into taking further maths as an extra, because they said you need it to go to uni to do maths. So I ended up doing further, just like you did an extra GCSE history on the side. I did further maths on the side as an AS level in my own time, and I sat those exams. And then when I got to uni, they repeated everything in the first year that we needed. And I was like, I didn't need to do it in my own time. I could have just done it in the first year. And I was just twiddling my thumbs in those lessons. So they do cover a lot of basic content. So if you've missed aspects of A-level or you've not done a particular subject, you do cover it at uni.
Again, you know, there wasn't that advice then, even somebody saying, if you want to do this course at university, you need to do this at A-level. There wasn't, these days there's lots of advice online, and you can look at the prospectuses of multiple universities, but in those days you had to send off for a prospectus, and then you found out.
Even like the advice that was available at the time when I was at the point of looking at uni, it was very limited to, because I went to a grammar school, so the expectation was everyone was going to go to uni. So the advice that they gave was, you're all going to end up there. So they only considered a uni route as an appropriate route. So anyone that wanted to do anything else wasn't given any support or guidance in that kind of field. And I think that's wrong as well. Like schools tend to pick whether it's a uni route or a non-uni route, and they'll focus on that. And then even like the area that I wanted to go into, physics and maths, I was pushed to doing further maths. Well, if there was someone that actually knew what they were talking about, they would have said, well, what uni do you want to go to? Let's have a look at their prospectus, whether you need it or not. So I think there's advice out there these days, but even now it's still not very relevant to the student. It's very generic. And
I feel that
a lot of assumptions.
The mental pressure to make a decision early on in our educational journey as well is that it's a cliff edge. It's a constant cliff edge.
Yeah.
I taught a boy a few years ago who was really kind of stressed out about school and said, you know, I'm going to fail my maths and English GCSEs. I'm going to fail my maths GCSEs. And when I went into it, I said, well, all right, just fail them and then you can just resit them next year. And just, wait, what? What do you mean I can resit that? I said, just resit. You can sit your exam anytime you like.
Yeah.
And I think that this cliff edge of making a decision and then your A-levels, if you haven't done that, then you can't possibly go to university ever in the rest of your life and study this subject. So I help a lot of adults now. You know, my oldest client, I think, is 61, who was like, right, I want to go to university to study this. What do I need and how can I go about it? And I said, well, you can sit your A-levels if you want to. Like if it's, say, she said, you know, they didn't have A-levels back then. But if they say they need A-levels to get in, and there's lots of universities now that deal with adult learners and mature students, they were in my day. But yeah, there's so many opportunities now. It's not a cliff edge, you know, it's not this journey that if you don't make that step, then it's cut off forever. I don't think that that's the case anymore. Thank goodness.
And I think also, like you mentioned the story of the boy, just giving them that space to kind of mature, because not everyone is ready to sit exams at the age that we're told to sit them. And I often look back at my English skills. I was really poor at English, like really bad. I couldn't construct a sentence properly. I was great at the maths, but the English language side of stuff, I didn't like essay writing, none of that. And when I got to sitting GCSEs, I would have got, if my English teacher had given up on me, I would have failed. There was no doubt about that. But she kept at me, she kept giving me the coursework back, and she's like, you need to improve it. You need to improve it. You need to improve it. I must have written the coursework like 10 times on 10 different topics because she wasn't convinced I was going to get the mark that I deserved. And it so depends on the teacher that you've got, because had she given up, I wouldn't have got the mark that I got at the end. But I remember I really struggled with essay writing up until I had my teaching degree. And that's when, for me, that's when it all kind of, it started to make sense. I could structure an essay now. I could put an argument together. And it just makes you realize that actually you mature at different rates. And it doesn't mean you're not going to achieve it at any point. It just means not yet. And it's that growth mindset mentality of you're going to get there, just not yet. It's not your time yet. And not giving up.
Yeah, my understanding of essays didn't come until I became an examiner. And then I was like, oh, that's the difference between a good essay and a bad essay. It just clicked one day.
Well, I don't think I've got the same level of understanding as you do. Mine's just a basic understanding of how do I construct an essay. Okay, so you went and you studied BSc at uni. How did you find that? How was that process of learning science for the first time at that such high level content?
I loved it. Everything made sense all of a sudden. I could do it or I couldn't do it. And I took a number of courses in addition, because obviously a degree is not enough. So I did like a leadership and management course with the Institute of Leadership and Management. I did kind of a supplementary extra course in computer science, I think, and learn how to learn computers in the evening. So yeah, I've always got 10 projects on at the same time.
Sound like me.
I once went to this really amazing talk, and it was a talk for our students in school, but it's really kind of stuck with me. And it was from the, I think it was a conductor for the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra or the New York Orchestra or something like that. And he was talking about how learning in life is not linear. So, you know, we've come to think of it, if I sit those exams and then if I get those grades, I can do that. And if I don't, then I can do that. And this linear process. And he said that the problem with having this step by step is that if you don't get it, it's almost automatically a failure because you didn't make that next step. And that's how when instead we should really be thinking of learning as kind of like a sphere or a ball, that we've got this happy ball and oh, I'm happy doing this, I understand this is my knowledge. And then you kind of look outside your circle and you look outside the this bubble. I keep using the word bubble today. I've obviously got them on the brain after all of the COVID advice going back to school. But if you look outside of it and it's like, oh, that looks interesting. Oh, that looks like an interesting course. Oh, I could sit my maths A level, could I? Oh, maybe I can do that. And what you've got to do is kind of come up with a balance with everything else that's going on in your life. And that includes, you know, your family, your friends, your health. And I used to mentor some students in schools who were underperforming according to statistics, and you know, that they used to say to me, oh, that I've been predicted an A star in French, but I'm only getting a C grade. And I used to say to them, well, anyone can get an A star in French, right? And no, miss, I said you could. I said, if you studied French for 8 hours a day for 10 years, I guarantee you, if you sat a GCSE at the end of it, you'd probably get an A star.
I don't even think you could do it for 10 years.
I said, let's face it, we have a life, right? We're studying 8 or 9 other subjects. We have hobbies, we have extracurricular activities, we have other areas of life and development that we have to balance with our studies. So, all right, maybe I could get an A star in French, but I have to kind of balance out how important that is to me. And if it is important, then sure, then I'll give my efforts on that. But it's what then falls out. What do I miss?
I think it's the idea that time is limited, and it's where do you put your focus on? Do you put your focus on something that's going to be useful in the future? And you don't know, French languages are a great skill to use because you might travel and you might utilize it, and you might not appreciate it at this moment in time, but later on you'll be grateful that you've got a second language. But I think kids are limited in school, limits them into thinking just for the test. And I think what you were talking about, the linear fashion of we need to do this, we need to do that, they don't get the opportunity to think outside the box longer term, to see where do I want to be in 20 years time? Do I want to be traveling? Oh, okay, I want to do a language then. Do I want to be doing this? Do I want to be going to uni? Do I want to be doing research? If they don't have that vision when they're younger, I think they've got a bigger chance of messing up their education system and their tests because they don't see the value in what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think you see that often in kids, those kids that get disengaged, they don't see the purpose of sitting that exam. And from a young age, I think it's very important to have that career advice. And I know you didn't have any. And I know when I was younger, we didn't have any. From, I think the point at which we got career advice was when we were picking A levels. By that point, we've already limited stuff because we didn't pick it for GCSE, or we've already kind of decided that a certain GCSE is not for us, so we've stopped working in that area. And I think that's too late at that point. We need to get the kids when they're still at primary level and put those seeds into their brains, and they start thinking, oh, I might want to be a surgeon. Okay, so I'm going to need this. I need to do this path. Or I want to be a car designer. What do I need to do? I need to be good at doing art, and I need to be focusing on this. And I think having that focus in place and the priorities right from the straight is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I feel quite supported because my mum always said, just do what makes you happy. That was always her advice. If you want to learn about it, learn about it. If you want to do that.
I had the same sort of advice from my parents, and I got really upset because everyone else's parents was telling them exactly what to do. And I was like, tell me what to do, because I did my A levels, I picked what I wanted, so I did art, textiles, physics and maths, and when it came to deciding what to do at uni, I was like, Mum, Dad, tell me what to do. And they were like, no, you pick whatever makes you happy. And I was like, no, I don't know, I need advice. Like, why aren't you helping me? Everyone else is being helped. And all my friends saw it as a blessing that I could decide what I wanted to do, but I saw what they had as a blessing because they were told, so they had a direction to follow. But my parents were always like, if we pick for you and then you don't like it, you're going to blame us. So
that's true. Yeah, perhaps that's why my mum said that as well. Then when I finished my degree, obviously, I needed to earn money. Like by that point, I'd gone off bursaries and scholarships and grants and everything that I possibly could, and I needed to get a job. So I did my PGCE, which was fully funded. Now, stupidly, I chose to do a geography PGCE. Looking back, I could have, if I'd have become a science teacher, which I could have been with a science degree, I would have got a nice golden handshake as well, because there was a shortage back then. I really didn't think things through. Like I really did study in life everything that I wanted.
Were they giving bursaries and stuff back then for science teaching?
Yeah, so what was called a golden handshake back then. So if you studied science and then went in to teach it
And stayed there for a length of time. So I think when I studied, because my background's in science, so I did a physics, a PG DipEd I did. So I got a scholarship from the Institute of Physics to do it. So it was either you could apply for a scholarship from your specialism, or you could get the government grant. But they gave it right from the start. So it's interesting how they change. And now it's like double what it was when I did it.
Yeah.
It's like really high, and then they also get a golden handshake as well. I think if you're in the profession for 3 years, you then get another grant of a couple of grand, I think. But it's interesting. They get people in, and you're not really supported to stay in the profession.
To stay there. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say follow the money. That's not what my advice would be, and just go for those that you get shorted subjects. I do believe very much in go for what you're passionate about. But my problem was that I was passionate about everything. I liked all subjects. Yeah. So even when I studied my PGCE, I still did a postgraduate certificate on the side in teaching English to speakers of other languages, so like a TEFL course. And then I did one looking at a postgraduate certificate looking at special educational needs and dyslexia as well. So.
Oh wow! So you've got lots of.
Lots of hats. Don't, honestly, it's ridiculous. It's literally, I'm like, ooh, what can I do? Oh, that looks interesting. I'll give that a go.
I think I got to the point after I did 4 years of physics at uni, because I got to master's level. So that's it. That's it. I've had enough. I don't understand what's going on anymore. Because one of our exams, we had to derive Einstein's equation. You know, the E equals mc squared.
Yes.
And I didn't understand how it was being derived. I just learnt it off by heart, and I regurgitated it for the exam because it was just beyond me by that point. And then when I did my PG DipEd, so I did the PG DipEd, which gives you kind of points towards a master's level. If I went and did a master's education, I thought, this is it. I can't do it anymore. Even though I'm still learning, I don't think I could go back and do another degree or a master's or anything like that, because I like to learn in my own time and space now. I don't want to.
Syd, I've just applied today to do another degree online.
I don't have the discipline to do stuff online. I work a lot to deadlines, and I think that's the way I work. I've figured out how I work. If it was a live session, then I think I'd be okay. But if it's a pre-recorded online session, I'll pay for it, and then it'll just be sat there. And I won't actually do anything.
No, this is a live thing. You actually have to hand stuff in. So yeah, it's online because all the universities have gone online now as well. So
yeah,
the new opportunity there for something a bit different. So we'll see how that pans out. Like I said, I've applied. I don't know whether or not I'll be accepted on the course yet.
What subject is this in then?
Local history.
Oh, okay, something completely different. So you've got your geography, you've got your English, you've got your SEN, and now you're doing history. Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of, even from the very first year of teaching, I was always teaching more than one subject. So I taught humanities, taught geography and history up to GCSE.
Wait, isn't it weird? If you're a humanities teacher, you're expected to teach history and geography, and they're completely different.
They are, but they're all about people, and they're all about stories. That's what I always say. It's you know, geography is about people living with the environment.
I always that if you're a science teacher, you're expected to teach physics and biology and chemistry, and they're completely different. They're completely, they're vastly different. And I specialised in physics, but because I'm a science teacher, I'm expected to be able to teach biology and chemistry. And I left both of those at GCSE. So my knowledge of those is very, very limited. So I'm teaching chemistry GCSE at the moment, but I'm having to learn a lot of that, invest a lot of time into it. But biology GCSE, I've been asked to teach it, and I'm like, no. I don't think it's a lot about memorizing stuff and knowing facts. And I'm like, I don't think I want to do that.
Yeah, it gets to that point, I think, doesn't it, when you're having to prep before teaching.
And a lot of prep, because you have to learn facts and you need to know them just like that. And I think with biology, you need to know the next level up to be able to teach it effectively. So like you need to know A level to be then able to, because with physics I can go, oh, this is an A level, you're going to learn this at uni. I can't do that with chemistry and biology because my knowledge just goes up to GCSE. So if I'm teaching primary or key stage 3, I can say, oh, you're going to learn this at GCSE for the biology and chemistry. But I can't go any beyond that because I don't know at what point that they will be learning. So I think it's really helpful when you have experienced it. And I guess for you, the science, you can probably go, oh, you'll learn this at uni.
Yeah.
And it's harder to know where an A level or GCSE exactly where you're going to be taught it because you haven't experienced it yourself. So I find it really weird that you're
I mean, at this point in time, I've now examined multiple subjects as well. So when I'm tutoring, like on an individual level, and I might be tutoring history, for instance, I'll be tutoring history A level, and then I'll be like, you know, you write your essays in geography when you do this, and because I can make those connections, they're like, wait, what? You know about the geography syllabus as well? And like, don't even get me started. I know about a lot of syllabuses.
It's really interesting, especially when you're interested in multiple subjects. So I think you're very much like me. I love my art, and people are like, you do art as well? I love it. And then I show them my art, and they're like, you're a scientist and an artist. Like, how does that work? I'm like, I wouldn't go as far as calling myself an artist, but what I do is art. So
everyone is an artist.
Exactly. But I think being called an artist sounds really kind of, you've got to be working full time on it. And sometimes you're doing the same as what an artist is doing, but you find it difficult to label yourself as that because you don't think you're as accomplished as someone that is an artist. So it's interesting how we kind of put ourselves in boxes as well, and we label ourselves and we limit ourselves into what we can possibly do. But I've also got the textile side, and I've not really utilized that in my teaching yet, and I'd love to, because this is what I loved about textiles, because even though I think it's very underrated. DT is very underrated because I did textiles technology at A level. So it was called textiles technology. So within that, we were learning about how you can create smart materials, how you can manufacture smart materials. And then the logical process of manufacturing is very much like maths. You do this, you do that, you do that, you get an output. And then there was so much physics involved in it. And I was very lucky that when I did physics A level, we did a course called Advancing Physics. So it's not like the typical A level where you've got prescribed coursework or experiments that you do. We could pick what we wanted to do for our experiments, as long as it loosely covered one of the topics that we'd done. So one of the topics that we'd done was Young's modulus. So that's to do with stretching and stretch and strain. That's all I remember. And so I thought, oh, it'd be really cool if I could do something that's textiles related. So I looked at the different weaves, like 12 weave in a denim and like normal like woven cotton. And I did an experiment where I hung off weights of all of these fabrics. And I looked at how much they stretched and how the weaves made a difference. And because it linked to my textiles, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It was applied science. I think part of that is being missed in the education system when you're telling the kids exactly what they need to do and what the outcome of the experiment should be. You're losing that excitement of, oh, let's see what happens when I do this. Let's see. And you know that denim is stronger, but what makes it stronger and how much stronger is it? And putting a value to it because you've calculated it. I found it so fascinating. I found it.
So from my experience in IB schools as well, when I taught there, they have like interdisciplinary learning and
IB is very different.
Those projects are just amazing in terms of getting the students to think kind of outside the box and make connections between different things. So what you're saying there about different materials, I'm already thinking, wait, but it needs to be environmentally friendly but it needs to be robust. So I would join design with geography and physics, because you need to explain why some materials are more stretchy than others. And then maybe we can come up with a project where we design a sustainable product material and then hold a fashion show. Like, so all of these kind of ideas for a learning project are already, just from what you've said there.
And then you've got art in there because you're drawing the fashion design. You've got your maths in there because you're analysing the data. But it's interesting you mentioned the geography, because that wouldn't have occurred to me because I dropped that at GCSE. So for me, my strength is arts and then physics and maths, because that's where I've kind of focused. And that's like, I guess that's what the disadvantage is with specializing too early, because then you can't make those links with everything, because that subject's been pushed out of your imagination. It's just not part of it anymore. So yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I didn't look at any of the environmental impact. It wasn't part of the syllabus, and it wasn't in my kind of immediate subject that I'd chosen. But yeah, it's really fascinating.
I think during lockdown as well, a lot of people are starting to realise that some of the activities and craft activities that we do at home then links into so many different subject areas and curriculum areas. It's quite wonderful to say, oh well, you know, we created a vegetable garden, and then we learned about the plants, and then we learned about the different parts of the plant, and then we learned about the environment and the weather, because that affects the vegetable garden, and we learned about ecosystems, and it's bringing everything in together, all these different subjects that you wouldn't think.
And this is why I love working with homeschoolers, because there's no pressure from the parents of following a curriculum. I just come up with my own stuff. Like, I'm doing some science camps at the moment, and like magnets, I've covered it loads of times. Like curriculum content, I've covered loads of times. But then when I was teaching this, because we weren't just limited to the curriculum, I started doing some research on where exactly is the magnetic field around Earth? Like, how far does it go? And I learned that it stretches as far as the outer atmosphere. And then I learned which radiation from the sun it bounces off, and I learned about the different levels of atmosphere. And that must have been a geography. I'm assuming it comes up in. But I dropped it so young that I don't think I did it for GCSE. Did I do it for? I can't remember. But because I dropped it so young, it's not something that's instant knowledge for me. So I learned so much, and then being able to relay that to the kids and going, right, this links with our space module, because we were talking about the EM radiation from the sun, but now we're looking at the atmosphere as well. So there's a bit of physics in there from the electromagnetic radiation. It links with the debate about 5G, because we looked at the EM spectrum and which bits are dangerous and which bits aren't. And then we looked at the sun's radiation. We looked at the magnets. It's like, there's so much there. And it's so fascinating when you can make those links and you go, oh, we did this last time. We did this. We did that. Yeah, I love it. I love what I do. I love the fact that you can make those links and you can get really excited by it.
So yeah, I've always liked to learn about different topics and different subjects. And I lived in the Netherlands a few years ago. I would go to the Open University lectures, not Open University, but the university had open lectures that I would attend, and I would learn about film and you know, the genre of time travel in film. And then the museum would hold like an exhibition, and there'd be some topic about Renaissance artists, and oh, do you want to join this course, Claire? Yeah, sure, I'll learn about that, why not? So I really kind of, any opportunity whatsoever, but I didn't really do any more formal education until my 30s. So I was 35 when I started my master's, and it was really at the point of I'd reached the top of the pay scale, and you got to make the next leap, you needed a master's qualification. And when I did my PGCE, it wasn't counted as a master's. So I think these days it sometimes is. But so I thought, well, I'll do a master's then, because it will help me earn more money. Like, it was that straightforward. But I thought, I'm not going to do a master's in education. Back in kind of 2009 maybe, I started doing the national qualification for headship, and I really wasn't interested. I didn't find it useful whatsoever. I didn't think that it would help me in actually being a head mistress or whatever.
Were you a head teacher at that point then?
No. So I kind of worked my way up through, and got to the point of kind of, so head of department, head of faculty, and then kind of like assistant vice principal. But I was working with two other schools, so we had these partner schools, and doing, while the vice principal was on maternity leave, I kind of covered her and looked at assessment, because that was my fascination. I'm always fascinated with data analysis and assessments and things like that. And I was sat in a meeting when so what you have, if you have students, they're learning in class, right? They're predicted an A, but they're only working at a B. So then you have to put into place some intervention in order to help them get to the A. And then the head of department will say, okay, Syd, what are you doing with your maths classes? Like, what intervention strategies? How do you know how they're progressing? And so that's like monitoring of your monitoring. And then somebody asked me, well, what are you doing to monitor that? And I said, are you seriously asking me what I'm doing to monitor the monitoring of the intervention? And they said, yeah. And I'm done. Like, by that point, I was too far removed, I thought, from the whole reason I got into teaching in the first place, which was, you know, that spark of imagination to encourage students to realize that actually you can learn about whatever you want. Nothing is too difficult, and it's just tapping into a way of learning about it.
It's interesting that I think teaching is probably one of the fewest professions where the higher up you get, the less you do of what you initially start, what you get good at. So it's really weird, because in any other profession, the higher up you get, you do more of it, and you do it at a skilled level, and then you're teaching the others to do it. But you do less of it as soon as you start getting up. You're doing more data analysis and less actually.
I am pretty good at being in charge as well, though, Syd, like, just to throw that out there.
No, but it's not why you went into it in the first place, though. So it kind of takes out the excitement of being in a classroom, because you're not in a classroom for teaching anymore.
Yeah, so then I got back into kind of this, well, I want to make a difference in people's lives. I want to do something else. So I read online about United World Colleges, which is like a global, they were set up in the 1950s by a philosopher called Kurt Hahn, who also set up like the Outward Bound, for instance, based on this idea that learning is holistic, and that learning should come from kind of from the community. You should give back to the community. It's all about balance in life. So they follow the International Baccalaureate in terms of curriculum, but they do a lot more what they call service learning. So when I worked in the Netherlands, for instance, a group of students, I supervised them, and they worked in a cafe for the elderly, and the elderly would pay €5 and they would get a 3-course meal, but the students would learn whilst they were there the business skills and the Dutch. So there was a lot of students who were learning Dutch as a second language, or students who wanted to do business option at IB, so they were doing that. And then another project I was involved in was to renovate a castle. It's not a castle as we would understand it as British people, but like an old manor house castle with this garden area, and that attracted a lot of kind of the environmental science, biology students to renovate the garden, but also the history students to renovate the house. And the idea was that it would become kind of like a learning space eventually over a couple of years, but they would learn from that. So it was, again, the applied learning, and realizing the connections between not just what we do in school, but what we do outside of school, and everything else in between. But we did all sorts there. I absolutely loved it. I loved living there. I loved the fact that everything was interdisciplinary, and that's how I got much more involved in the IB. So I became an examiner with the IB, and then worked my way up, and now I'm a assistant principal examiner. But again, even what I examine is called World Studies Extended Essays. So it's bringing together different subjects to address a global issue. So even that is interdisciplinary and hopefully relevant in terms of service to people's lives. And
that's great. So you talked about briefly that you were in the Netherlands for a few years. So how did you find, I think you've touched on it as well, but what were the main differences between the education system in the UK and from those abroad, from where you've worked? Is it just the Netherlands you've worked, or are there other places?
I've worked in India and Germany for a while as well.
Okay, so what were the main differences?
I think they're just as academically rigorous in terms of their attitudes, but they don't pigeonhole students into, oh, well, you're an academic student, or you're a creative student, or it's just, I feel that there's much more balance between education and what kind of education should be in terms of the, you know, the physical activities and staying healthy, but also the academic side of it as well, and studying. And you know, we had a lot of students, like I said, that so the college that I worked at was part of the UWC schools network, and they are a huge international charity. I think Bill Gates, like, he donates something like 100 million to them or something like that to set up a scholarship for refugees, and they take students from all over the world. So some of the students that I was teaching had never been in mainstream education before.
Wow.
Some didn't speak English when they first arrived, and what the philosophy was, you've got to imagine being in the 1950s, the height of the Cold War. Kurt Hahn's philosophy was that if you're between the age of 16 to 18, you've developed enough character to know who you are and know what your culture and your systems and beliefs are, but you're not yet at that age where they're kind of fixed and you've already shut out anything else. So he believed that if he put learners between the age of 16 and 18 together, and they learned together and lived together for that period of time, then it would kind of contribute to world peace. So and it would build those relationships across the globe. So these days you have a lot of UWC graduates that go into diplomacy and politics and the UN and but also kind of international charitable organizations. A lot of the students that we got went back to, so they came for a scholarship, they went to one of the UWC colleges, and they got their qualifications, their IB. They might have gone on to universities, some of the top universities in the world, and then they would go back to their home countries, and they would set up, you know, their first lifeboat service, or a free medical school for people in their village, or like it's very much about giving back to the world. So
what does UWC stand for?
United World Colleges.
Okay, so that sounds interesting.
It's an interesting movement. It's an interesting philosophy, and they've been going now for almost 60 years. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've worked abroad, and then what do you do now then?
So I came back to the UK in 2014, and I worked at a further education college in central London as a curriculum manager, again, humanities. So my exact job title was curriculum manager of academics, and it was all of the academic subjects. So English literature, history, sociology, psychology. They didn't do geography for some reason at A-level, but it was A-level and GCSEs. And English was like its own department separately, English as a language as opposed to literature. And then you had the science department, which was separate as well. And then I was there for about 3 days, and I was sat in a meeting, and the meeting was about closing down the academics department. So I leaned over to my boss and I said, aren't I the head of the academics department? And basically the government had cut funding to sixth form, and they were moving, or the campus where I was, they were moving more towards the GNVQs and tertiary kind of qualifications. So then I was like, oh, all right, I've been back in the country 3 days and been made redundant. So then I helped out there for a while. I wrote a course which was approved by Ofqual, which was, you know, the access to university. So it was access to business, but it was the law pathway. So I enjoyed that. That took me a good couple of months to write that course and get it approved. And that's still running, thank goodness. And then I saw an advert, or no, I met a lady actually at a digital education conference, and she worked at a newly established digital school in central London. And I spoke to her and was completely inspired, and I realised that I'd seen an advert for this school before it first opened the year before, and thought about applying, but I don't know whether I should apply or not. And she said, we can't find a humanities teacher, and we've got until tomorrow.
Oh,
and
wow.
she said, can you come in? And I said, yeah, I can come in. So I went in the next day and looked around, and I thought I was there for an interview. So, you know, I'd prepped prepped the lesson and prepped my interview, you know, how you do before a job interview, about where do you want to be in 5 years, and how could you contribute to digital education. And I'd looked at the school, everything, and I'd looked around for half the day and had a conversation with the head and the directors and things, and they said, so when you come back on Monday, can you take this class? Okay, now, wait, what? So I got the job, although it wasn't really that much of an interview. And there, that was honestly my happy place. I could have worked there for the rest of my life. I was still working with the IB on the side, and I was still working with kind of charitable organizations and education. But I was working, I loved it there. That's when I decided to do my master's. And for the first time, you know, I felt, oh, I've got enough kind of time and money behind me, because that had always been an issue. I was like, I'm going to study a master's. So I studied education, power and social change at the University of Birkbeck, because I thought I don't want to do a master's in teaching, and I don't want to do I thought about international education, and they were like, oh, because there's an international leadership master's that you can do. And I thought, oh, that might be helpful if I want to run a school elsewhere in the world. But no, so then I was quite happy there. But then what happened? I met a boy. That's how it happens, I'm afraid. Not a boy.
Like going, you're like on this path, and then it's like.
I was about halfway through my master's, and we decided to move house. So I had a dog already. I've always had dogs in my life. Holly, the traveling dog. And he wanted another dog, and we were looking to buy a house together. And we thought, well, we can either get a 1-bed apartment in London, or we can get, you know, a 3-bed country cottage. So the decision was made, and we moved out of London. So he still commutes in every day, but then I came here. So then I was like, well, what can I do? And what I had been doing was giving advice on education and schooling. So through my connections, because I'd worked at all these different schools in all these different places, people who were moving to the UK were like, oh, I'm moving to London, but I don't understand the British education system. Like, do I apply to my local school? Or and it was a lot of kind of well-traveled families, if you like, that had lived in multiple locations. And I also had going the opposite way as well. So I had people in the UK approaching me and said, oh, well, you've worked in Amsterdam, you know, you've worked in the Netherlands, and we're moving to Amsterdam in the fall. Do you what schools are there, which would you recommend, what are we looking for? So I started giving this advice, and then I realized, oh, actually there are people that do this for a living. So I decided to set up my education consultancy, which is what I do now.
So what's that called?
Rose Education Consultancy.
And what do you do? So I'm assuming you don't just cover that, you cover a broad range of things. So what else do you want to quickly give us an overview of the other things that you cover within that?
Sure. So we give university advice, schooling advice, and general education advice to just about anybody who wants it and requires it. I thought when I first moved out here, because I'd been doing schooling advice as an education consultant previously, I thought that's what people would want. But when I moved here, what a lot of people were interested in was the university advice, but also advice on homeschooling. And I was contacted by so many students, learners, some of them were adults, saying, okay, you're a qualified teacher and I need you to authenticate my coursework. I'm a homeschool student, but coursework needs authenticating. And I said, well, what do you mean authenticating? And so I called the assessment centre. And of course, if you're a regular mainstream student, or you're in school and your teacher obviously sets the coursework, sees you write it, can vouch that it's yours, gives you a little bit of assistance according to the exam board, of course, requirements differ, and then, you know, authenticates it and say, yeah, this is their coursework, this is what grade I would get it, and then the exam board moderate it. So because in the past I'd been involved, I'd worked for different exam boards moderating coursework, and I knew how the assessment process worked, like from the official end. I was like, oh, this is really easy. I can set up this authentication system. So that's what I did. And then the assessment centre called me up and said, you know, this is incredible. Like, we're an exam centre, but you've set up this whole process pretty much over the course of a week for this student. Would you be interested in kind of taking on helping us come up with a process and helping us with our homeschooled students? And I said, yeah, sure. How many homeschooled students are we talking? Thinking, oh, their assessment centre, they'll have, and they said, oh, about 3,000 a year. I said, yeah, sure.
You've been busy then.
Yeah, my philosophy, you know, what I like is not if I can do it, it's how I can do it. So if anybody approaches me, and then through that, and then through the international links, through the exam board, through all the different schools, it turns out that I have this huge network. And therefore, when people are looking for any kind of advice for education, so I've had calls from football clubs and academies who would like to set up an education system for footballers. Then I get inquiries a lot from people in the performing arts, like actors and actresses, who don't just want a private tutor, but like a whole education system. So it's not really homeschooling. I think the technical term is otherwise educated, or something like that.
Over the years, homeschooling's the definition of homeschooling has changed, because homeschooling once upon a time was for the elite, those people that could afford tutors to come into the house and to work with the students individually. And now it's become more common for anyone to be able to just take their kids out and educate them at home. And I think there's a vast difference in the average person homeschooling and how they go about it. And those are the types of families that I've worked a lot with over the last 10 years. And then those ones that have a lot of money and are able to travel and will take a tutor with them when they go traveling. So there's a big difference in the way that people homeschool. And then you've got world schoolers, which is a different kettle of fish.
Yes.
So I think there's a vast definition of what homeschooling is and what it entails, and it differs from person to person. But the ultimate goal is still the same. We're trying to educate a child, and I think it's just changing the systems. Like you said, you're good at building the systems around how you deliver that.
And because of my background as well, I think that good educational advice should be available for all students. So not just those that can afford it, and not just those that can afford private school. Like, I wish that there had been somebody like me to say, when I was age 11, you know, Claire, if you do want to go to a grammar school, I mean, they didn't have grammar schools in my area, but if you did want to go to a private school, there's bursaries, there's scholarships. And that would never even occur to my mum, that was an option. She just knew that she had this child that was eager to learn. And
I also think that people that work in an industry like we do, in the education industry, we don't realize how much knowledge we've acquired over the years. We just don't realize it. So I get people calling me up, and like parents that haven't come to my sessions in years, but they'll be like, oh Syd, can you give me some advice? I'm looking at sending my kids to this school, and what do I need to be looking out for? And I'll give them an overview of what I know about the system and the area and the schooling system from what I've heard, because I've got lots of connections. But I don't realize that people value that, because for me it's just general knowledge in the education sector that we're in. But I think we build up lots of connections which are valuable, and we can reach out easily when we need them, but other people don't have that luxury of being able to do that.
I get a lot of inquiries as well from kind of publishers and producers, so that are producing educational materials and resources, but need a teacher or somebody on the front line to so that's not necessarily me, it could be somebody that, you know, within my network, or somebody that works for me, or I subcontract. So even things like, you know, the videos that are played on the BBC, and they all have an education consultant to guide them through, to make sure they're pitched at the right level, to make sure that they're tied in with the national curriculum content. And then I had a publisher who was producing a series of online kind of courses and textbooks, and they wanted to make sure that they wanted me to kind of project manage the writing of a number of A-level and GCSE courses. So obviously I couldn't write them myself, but I took that on, and then subcontracted authors to write those as well, and then put it all together. But even things like that, like the challenge of how do you assess somebody when there's no tutor or teacher? Like, how do you self-assess? So even the wording and the way that you write a course to allow people to be able to prepare themselves for exams and is a whole different ball game when there's not somebody face to face with you.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you've managed to find a niche there, which is in high demand, because you've got authors and you've got people that want content and then putting your connections to use. So the next part of the show is about top 3 kind of pointers, top 3, what did I call them earlier? Top 3 tips, that was it. Top 3 tips that you would give to anyone at home with their kids during lockdown. What could they do in terms of humanities if they want to explore humanities, or even just cross-discipline stuff? Just like where do they start and how do they go about it?
I think there's such a huge opportunity for interdisciplinary projects at this time. So you could even do, like, over a whole week, choose a theme for the week. So let's say dinosaurs one week, and you can pitch a whole week's worth of lessons reaching into lots of different subjects on the curriculums from Key Stage 1 all the way to A-level. I actually tried to do that. I did that for a while on my website. So when we first went into lockdown, I had a lot of requests from friends and relatives and things like that, and parents and tutees about how to not homeschool. I don't like that word because I think it's not schooling at home, but learn from home or home learning, and how to deal with that. So every morning I would do a live where I would set a task for the day, and it's usually a creative task or an arty task, like build an aquarium or a bug house in the garden, or learn how to cook a new dish. And then what I would do is I would post lots of resources underneath from lots of different subjects, and come at it from kind of an interdisciplinary but also a multi-level in terms of Key Stage 1 right through to Key Stage 4. So those videos are still on there. I stopped when school started going back, but I have a feeling I might have to start up again.
How many videos did you collate then? Because I started doing something similar where I did a live YouTube video daily. I stopped after 33. I was like, I can't do this. I can't keep up now.
I did about 6 weeks until half term, and then I did a week after half term. Some of the videos have disappeared, so some of them were on there but then disappeared, but they're all still there. People can, but I guess if people watch them now and they go back over them, then I'll be talking about, oh, isn't it nice weather today? Meanwhile, it's tipping its out, or oh, it seems that they've closed the schools today. So
where can people find these videos?
So those videos are on Facebook, on Rose Education Consultancy on Facebook. That's where I did. I will
put the link in the description as well for anyone that's looking for that. Okay, so that's one. So to do interdisciplinary stuff, and I think you providing all the resources and the links is such a big kind of deal for the parents, because it takes ages to find resources. So
well, that's what I thought as well. So I thought if I can just take that step out of it, and give that support to parents just in the first few weeks, then of course people, I think, kind of got into a routine. So I had some videos that had hundreds of views, and then by the end there was about 30 views. So I thought, oh, okay, by this point people are obviously starting to get into a routine, get into a rhythm and find things for themselves. But just today I had a friend post saying, okay, I've run out of lockdown activities and ideas now, what can I do? And I just put, have you looked at Rose Education Consultancy? And she was like, oh, I totally forgot that they were all there still. So that was quite nice. And when I think one of the reasons I filtered it out as well was when Oak National Academy it came on, that I thought, oh, actually that does what I was doing beforehand. So, and that's more subject specialist, I think.
Is that the one that the BBC are doing?
It's kind of hand in hand. So the Oak National Academy was put together by it's a nationwide one.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And there's now lots of independent schools that are making their curriculums completely open as well, online classes, online teaching. So if I find any really good resources, and I always put them just on the page so that parents can access them. But yeah, that would be my first advice, is make connections between subjects.
Excellent.
Don't feel like you have to do an hour of maths.
Yeah, because I think then it can get really boring and the kids aren't engaged. You want a solid hour of them being fully immersed in their learning, and you've done your learning for the day, but they won't stop. If they're fully immersed, they'll continue.
Yeah.
I think the best lessons are where you finish the lesson, but because you're at home and doing it online, the kids can just continue through. So for example, my art classes are only an hour and a half, but what I find is the kids are preferring them online because this is coming from the kids. The first thing they said was, we don't have to travel.
Mm.
The second thing is, we don't have to tidy up when the lesson finishes. We can carry on. And a lot of them are carrying on through for hours after and finishing the piece and then sending me photos. And I think that's really nice that they don't have to feel the pressure of having to stop there when they're in the flow of stuff. Because that's the worst thing to do.
I agree. I think it's amazing. I think that the joy of learning has come back. But I'm also aware that, you know, there are a lot of parents who don't have more than one computer in the house, who don't have a printer in the house, who sometimes don't have internet access in the house as well. So,
but I think the way around that is to find something where all the kids can participate.
Yeah.
Like the art we do from ages 5 all the way up to adults, like the whole family can participate. So there's one the session that we had on Saturday last week, we had the mum and the dad at the back with their oil pastels. We had the kids on the table, like the whole family was taking part, and I think it's really nice that families can do that. And there's loads of other opportunities online now where the entire family can participate, and I think a lot of the resources and the courses that you've done and the videos you've done where it's a project, you can all take part, you can all chip in, and you can all get involved, you can all be creative, and I think that's really nice for the families to be able to do stuff without the stress of, you've got to get this homework done. It's all about the learning now rather than the end result, and I think that's really nice.
So yeah, that would be my first tip. My second tip would be link up with other networks. So there's so many Facebook groups now on, you know, lockdown ideas and tips, and resources for home learning, all of these different places where people post and give ideas. Just join one and go with whatever they do every single day. So I know that as a business owner, I'm in a business group, and every day the owner of that group just posts one idea for your business, and it's just something little. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes, but it just kind of keeps me going, oh, I'll do that today. So it's just like that daily activity, and not to feel too overwhelmed. So make those links, and I hate the word network, but network. And what did you do? You know, ask other people what they did with their family. What I've seen as well is over Skype, like somebody else's parents teaching their students what they've done that day. So if their parent is an architect, and then they have a Zoom call with 4 or 5 of their friends with their children, and they're teaching them about, you know, how I design houses and how you can design houses, and then about the planning and about the visual look at, and then we have to think about using environmentally friendly materials and think about solar energy, and then from all of this you can bring in a lot of the other subjects. I mean, you can link some is a bit of a stretch in terms of stretching to a subject, but look at what we did at the start of this video when you said, oh, I'd like to design some clothing, and you brought in the physics, and then you brought in the design, and then I brought in the geography, and then I'm sure there's a way to bring in, you know, the maths and the English and the so there's always a way to kind of have one family activity and then extend to become more special.
I just got an idea. You could also bring in psychology, how people look at adverts and what makes them buy, and you could look at how people's perceptions change when you change certain colors and photos on the advert. There's so much you could do, and then you could have an art course on creating the advert, and then you could have a graphics design course on how to use computing software to create the advert. There's so much you can do.
So make connections between subjects, link up a network, and just use what's out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. Save yourself time. And then in regards to humanities in general, if we're giving advice for humanities learning, I would say think about the subconscious learning that takes place. So you're watching, you know, a film about I don't know, a Disney film. Name a Disney film.
Aladdin.
What was that one?
Aladdin.
Okay, so let's say Disney film, so then you think, oh, okay, so I'm going to learn about why is it called Aladdin, where's that come from? And then I learn about the Middle East, and then I learn about, well, actually our whole entire population and human race came from there. You know, originally Mesopotamia was one of the first civilizations that existed, and then I would look at kind of the history of science within Islam, and then I might have well, most of the Middle East is Muslim, so let's have a bit of RE today, and let's have a look at differences between different religions. So again, it's just kind of the subconscious learning that people get sometimes when you're watching a documentary or when you're watching something on the television, asking those questions. So, oh yeah, and even making links and kind of just hinting to your students, like, you know, this is what we learned about today.
I think that's really fascinating, because I love when I do get, so I don't have a TV, but if I do watch something on my computer, I'm always looking for that other information that I'm getting from a movie or anything that I'm watching. I'm, oh, I'm going to go research that now. Or picking up on cultural differences. So I started watching a lot of Turkish dramas. It's not the one that's really famous amongst people that everyone seems to be watching at the moment, but there's another one that I watched. I don't like watching what everyone's watched, because everyone knows about it, right? So I'd rather watch something that no one's watched.
I tend to watch it about 10 years later.
Yeah, I'd rather watch something that no one's watched, and then I've got some other knowledge that no one else has. So I watch really obscure stuff. But I watched this one Turkish drama where they did like weird stuff. Like when they got frightened, they would put their thumb underneath their teeth and push it up. And I was like, what on earth is that? So then I went and Googled it. And it's one of their kind of cultural things where when we get scared, we kind of go like, oh, we're scared, right? That's like our natural reaction. Or like, yeah, or like this. And what they do when they get terrified is that they push their teeth up.
I wonder what the biological instinct is for that.
Well, I guess your teeth are going to fall out if you're scared out of your skin. I guess that's where the phrase "scared out of your skin" kind of comes from, where you get kind of scared and your teeth start what is it, shaking? What is it called? Shivering.
Yeah.
So it's really weird, and that's one of their cultural things that they do in Turkey. And then I also saw in the drama that they would pour some water at the back of a car, right? And I was like, what is going on there? And like that bucket of water, they'd chuck a bucket of water, and apparently that's meant to be a sign of good luck. So when someone's going on a long journey, they'll chuck a bucket of water. And then I was speaking to a friend who's from a different part of the world. I can't remember where she's from now, or who I even spoke to. I don't even remember. But they were saying that if you chuck water or anything at the back of a car, that's a way of saying we don't want you back. It's an insult. So it's interesting how there's cultural differences, and you pick these up when you're watching stuff, and then you can then go off on a tangent and go do research and look at where these have and I haven't gone as far as looking at where they've stemmed from, but I'm fascinated to find out when I've got a bit more time. Yeah, it is fascinating.
Well, you know, but there's over 200 countries in the world, so if you did want 200 daily activities, then just focus on a different country each day.
I think you need a whole year to focus on a country at a time, because there's so much. You can look at food, you can look at culture, you can look at language, you can look at clothes, you can look at differences in the way people's manners are, and what they do, and the cultural differences there, and the phrases that they use, because each language has its own phrase, like specific phrases that when you translate it loses its meaning or has no meaning at all. So I think there's so much you can do, even if you just focus on one country at a time.
Yeah, we used to have a game when I worked in the Netherlands, because there was over 100 different nationalities in the school, and we used to have the idioms game, and we used to translate something into English, like an idiom. So in Dutch, there's a whole group called Make the Cat Wise. So if you don't want to hear about something, you say, go make the cat wise. Like, I don't want to hear it. Go speak to someone else about it.
Oh, because you go and fill the caps here rather than mine.
Yeah.
Really
I don't want to listen. Yeah, I'm not interested. So and then there was one about a monkey coming out of a tree bum backwards or something, which was a Finnish expression. So basically, you're doing things all wrong. You're making a job more difficult.
It's really weird. And I know we've got some in English as well, and we use them so kind of naturally, that for someone that's coming in and learning English for the first time, it's just like, what? They're just so confused. But yeah, so I think those 3 tips are amazing. So you've said first one was cross kind of discipline, and you pointed to your website and to your Facebook page, sorry, to go and have a look on that. The second one was reaching out to your network and utilizing that. And I think it was interesting, Gemma mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. I interviewed Gemma Smith, that you know, and she was mentioning actually reach out on LinkedIn and connect with people. Now's the opportunity that everyone's at home, utilize it. So I think it is great that you mentioned that as well. And then the third one, what was the third one that we said?
Link up network.
We just mentioned it.
I can't remember.
We were talking about countries and stuff. What was
I should have written it down.
What was the point that we mentioned? I've completely forgotten.
We'll come back to it. Edit it in.
So yeah, the third point that we just talked about literally 2 minutes ago. Right, so we're near the end of the show now. We're going to do a question from my question box, the Home Ed Me challenge.
Sure.
A science question, a tech, an arts and engineering, or a maths question?
Can I have a tech question?
Yeah, I need to put some more questions in. I think I need to get a question from everyone I interview because I'm running out of questions now. Right, so let's pick up this question. Oh, we've had this a few weeks in a row now, I think. What is the most important technology of the future? So in your opinion, what do you think the most important technology is?
I think that the purpose of all technology and the technologies that have taken off, the whole purpose of it is to communicate, right? To better understand each other. So I think that video conferencing like this one is just absolutely incredible, and it's taken the world by storm. So I know that people talk about social media and Facebook kind of changing the world. Sorry, what's the question again? I'm dyslexic.
What is the most important technology of the future? So I
think it'll be to do with communication. I think
because a video, you've mentioned video, and I've mentioned this before, where it'd be amazing to have a hologram of the person in front of you.
I was just about to say that.
I think that's the next step in video, right? To actually have like a 3-dimensional visual representation of the person. You can actually walk around and not be seated in the place, and you can communicate with them like you would. You just can't touch them.
Yeah, I think so. I think hologram is the next thing, because I mean, you know, 30 years ago, would we have imagined that we could video call or that we could have a huge online virtual conference? I just had my first one this morning, by the way. I'm so happy. So usually this time of year, I'd be giving workshops in schools, like revision workshops, exam workshops, and then over the summer, I kind of do intensive like essay writing skills, exam skills, all that kind of thing. And sometimes I go into schools, and sometimes I run them separately so that, you know, anybody can sign up and come to them. And this was one that I had booked in already. And the school said, well, we've been using like technology, we've been having webinars and online. So I was, okay, so I used Google Meet, which usually I use Zoom. And it was amazing. I used various different apps. So I had my iPad going at the same time, and they were being taught how to effectively cite and reference, which you might find boring, but I find really exciting. And so they use an app called Nearpod, which controls your iPad, even though they're there. So, and then I could do these quizzes, and then the lady that was hosting it, and she was like, "Yay, everybody's got that quiz right." And then she introduced me, and then I ran my workshop, and I was able to screen share. I was able to, you know, give links. We were able to comment on documents and build things together online. So I think for collaboration, communication, I think that can only go forward even more.
And I think it makes the world smaller as well, because suddenly everyone's online, everyone's at home. You can work with anyone in the world now, and you can kind of build up that network. And I'm working on a project at the moment, a world lockdown tour, where we're going to be getting kids from all around the world to connect virtually online, but with the purpose of learning about their culture, their faith, their religion, their traditions, their country. But I want to literally, like you said, there's 200 countries. I'm like, oh, there's so much. Like, it'd be amazing, at least to start off with, to get people from each of the continents all connected online, and then just expanding the countries and teaching them because I run public speaking courses online as well. So teaching them public speaking skills, so then they can share their stories, but then opening their stories up to a bigger audience online and streaming that. So I'm really excited. We're still in the early days. I'm juggling so many different projects at the moment. My head's full of ideas. And I think yours is probably as well.
It is. I think this whole like the COVID situation, I think what it's done for me is kind of, first of all, for mainstream education, it's kind of made them realize, oh, wait, hang on, this traditional way of doing things isn't going to work. What's been really frustrating for me in the first few weeks, what my company did was we set up like a donation, so you could donate old devices like laptops and iPads and even phones, so that students could access online learning. But I think that the future of it, I think people have got to work together from this. So the cancellation of exams, for instance, so the IB already have a number of piloted assessments that are done online remotely, so they're done on computer anyway. But I think that will be accelerated quite a lot, and we'll be looking at, well, what is it that we're assessing in the first place? When it comes to exam situation for next year, I think that they'll be looking at, you know, changing that and thinking, well, could we have open book? Could we assess something different? Could we have shorter exams? Could we cut the curriculum content and still give a meaningful qualification? Right. So I think technology has a huge part to play in that. I don't think it's the be all and end all. I still think that, you know, the traditional pedagogy has a place, but I think for the first time, more parents are aware and more families and learners are aware of the choice that is available.
I think it's given the system a shake-up, because suddenly they have to learn how to do online. And I think a lot of the families that I've worked with, they would have never considered online teaching before. So when we shifted online in the early days, it was the first time they were doing anything online. And then to get the feedback from them, and they're like, actually, this works. It works, and it's more convenient, and we don't have to be traveling, and we don't have to, like, there's an alternative way. And I think even if I started doing some stuff online from September, and when I first started, I was so resistant to online teaching prior to that, because I thought you lose that kind of personal touch, you lose the ability to assess the kids, you lose the ability to be creative. And I was so wrong. Because those first couple of months, I was like, I like this. But I was also afraid that parents wouldn't see the benefit of it if I tried to move. And then I think it's been a great opportunity for everyone to see how you can utilize it, and how you can actually utilize the technology to our advantage and save time. And
I think it's almost taken a step further now as well. So up until this point, technology and kind of working online and tutoring online, it's always been seen as a replacement for face-to-face tutoring, or as an alternative. But I think there are certain tasks and certain things that you can do online that you can't do face-to-face. So I think it's not just about replacement, it's also about new opportunities and kind of growth in the way that we learn, what we learn, how we learn, and the aspects of education that are important to us in the future. I would say that it's part of that as well. What I'd really hope to see is kind of like a synthesis of all of these different, I want to call them factions, but that's the wrong word completely, all of these different sectors of education. So the independent schools, the international schools, the forest schools, home learning education, adult learning, distance learning, those people who, you know, like me, sign up for online courses on a whim and then regret it for 3 years. No, I'm joking. I'd really like to see a synthesis of all of this coming together, so that we have a system that isn't, you know, that cliff edge of you get your GCSEs or that's it, but also that there isn't this divide between tutors, teachers, home learners, independent schools, that everybody works together to develop an education system and ultimately gives parents choice in what works for their family. And I think that during lockdown, certainly in our household here, we've really had some meaningful discussions about life and what works for our family in terms of work-life balance, in terms of, you know, learning and working. But I think that same discussion can be had for education as well. I think that it's a bit of a shake-up, and I know it's incredibly scary, and but I also think that now's the time to look forward and to say, well, actually, and I still believe in traditional schools, and I believe textbooks. How, if you had a really good national curriculum textbook, how much easier would that have made home learning for the vast majority of families? So going back to when I was off school, age 10, and you know, and I was only allowed, I had to lay flat for so many hours a day and all that kind of thing. I think that, you know, I had textbooks then, and I worked my way through and I answered the questions at the end, and then my teacher. So I think there's a value in the traditional methods, there's a value in modern methods, but I'd love to see a synthesis and everything coming together. I'm not quite sure how yet. I have a dream in my head, news coming soon, maybe, about how all of this can be synthesized together. So I've got in talks with a few different people, not just about, you know, academics and exams and studying online, but also about a more community focused education approach.
And I think you're right that the online, once we start exploring more online, we're going to find things that you can do online that you can't do face to face, like the fact that you can't connect with multiple people in multiple different countries at the same time. That's only possible online. You wouldn't be able to physically travel out and get people together. And that's what excites me about the World Tour project. And I'm really looking forward to working with lots of different people on that. And it's also interesting how we don't actually realize how global social media is. So when I kind of introduced the project and I mentioned it, we're going to be doing this project, I put on my feed, I was like, well, where is everyone from, and what countries are you working in, what are you working on? And I got like probably 3 or 4 different continents just by one message, and it's and that was only a small selection of my Facebook friends. So I think it's interesting how we're already global, but we're not really working together. And even within the education system, being online means we can utilize stuff that's happening in America. We can feed that into our education system. We can take what's happening in Europe and some of their curriculum content and feed that in. And we can learn languages online from people that speak the language rather than teachers that are working here. So it brings communities together in a way that we can't actually physically get on a plane and always do.
And even from kind of like the official governing body type perspective as well, in terms of examination boards, like, so usually as a senior examiner I would have, you know, a curriculum model meeting, or I would have an assessment meeting, I would have a moderation meeting, and would look at all the exams and the grades for that year. All of that is now switched on. So some exam boards, some subjects and exams are still going ahead, and they've switched around how they've done that, but the whole way that we work behind the scenes as examiners has also changed. And I think that there's a lot of excitement there as well, particularly amongst senior examiners, going, oh, imagine if we could just do this, like if we could do that, if we could. So we're kind of pushing behind the scenes as well for a different way.
I guess it's good that exam marking went online not that long ago, because before people used to receive paper exam things to mark and to actually then send back, and now it's all done online. So they made a good move there, and it's just about now putting the processes in for a lot of the other things that need to happen in a digital world. But Claire, thank you so much for coming in today. I will share Claire's details in the description. It's been amazing. You do so much, and I'm excited to hear more about the projects that you'll be working on, and maybe there'll be an opportunity for us to work together as well. So Claire's been talking about humanities in today's episode number 8. Next week we've got someone exciting coming in again for episode number 9. I've completely forgotten what it is that we're covering next week. I think we're staying on the theme of humanities, but looking specifically at history. I think that's it. But there's so much happening at the moment that my head's just like, So thank you guys for watching. It's been a fab 90 minutes. I think we've gone over 90 minutes, but it's been amazing. Thank you, Claire, for coming in today. And we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you very Syd for hosting. Bye.
Bye.